Peace and blessings. This is Rayesa Gheewala, the Divorced Muslimah Coach. And we have a treat today. One of my really good friends, Amira Zaki, is going to be joining us today. And we're talking all about sexual health for divorced Muslimas. And here she is. Let me just get her on. I think, Amira, you have to... Okay, and let's see. Oops. Oh, there you are. Assalamu alaikum. Wa barakatuhu.
Walaikum assalam, Rayesa. How are you?
I'm doing great. Alhamdulillah. It's so good to have you here, and thank you for agreeing to have this dialogue and this conversation with me. I'm so excited to learn from you.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to talk to you, and inshallah, I hope everyone watching either live or the replay benefits, inshallah.
Inshallah. Yeah, I must say, why don't you just take a few minutes and introduce yourself, because I think you can do it best, and then we'll get right in.
Yeah, sure. So I call myself a sex educator. Something that I didn't think I would be doing, but alhamdulillah, I feel grateful that I'm doing this work. And it started from my own personal experience of a struggle that I went through. I went through a condition called vaginismus. And after overcoming that condition, I really started to see that, wow, I went through this struggle because of a lack of sex education personally. And so I thought, you know, in order to prevent other people from going through sexual issues, I really took it upon myself to firstly educate myself. And now I want to share that knowledge. So I want to educate other people as I'm learning and growing. I want to share that with everyone. So that's what I do, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. I just was watching what you shared today about living on purpose and around our tests and our struggles and our challenges. And when we are going through them, there's a reason behind it, right? And to find the essence or the lesson in the struggle and the pain, which, you know, will guide us into what we're meant to do and our purpose. And when I was watching you, I was thinking about my own self and how my own journey of going through a divorce really allowed me to see, okay, no, this is my mission. This is why I went through all of this, to help other women have, you know, go while they're going through the same process, to be able to use it as a tawakkul building experience and allow this experience to elevate them in this life and the next. And it's just beautiful when our struggles and our pains can lead to such wonderful purpose, mashallah. So
yeah, I love that you said that. And you and I are similar in that sense, because I went through a struggle, and as you said, when you're in that struggle, it's hard to see the silver lining. It's hard to see the benefit of the struggle, because it is difficult. No one's saying it's not difficult to go through the struggle. It definitely is. But when you've overcome that struggle, or you're past that struggle, and then you realize that Allah made me go through that struggle for a reason, and here I am doing this work where Allah is providing for me through this work that I do because of the struggle I went through. My rizq came from that struggle. It's beautiful when you think about it, not just rizq in terms of money, but the rizq in the full broad sense of the word, but also Allah, inshallah, is rewarding me for this work that I'm doing. And the same applies to you with the work that you do, you know, having gone through your own struggles with divorce and so on, and now helping other women going through similar struggles. I think it's so beautiful for us to be in this position. And I really do hope, I'm really, really happy that we're doing this live, because I really do think that it's relevant. I think a lot of people think that once you're divorced, your sexual health is kind of cut off, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Actually, perhaps for divorced women, it's even more important to talk about their sexual health, because as we're going to discuss today, you know, once a woman's divorced, it doesn't mean that her desire for sex switches off. It doesn't mean her desire for intimacy and connection switches off. If anything, sometimes that desire can be even stronger. So I'm really looking forward to what we talk about, inshallah.
Awesome. I just want to welcome everybody who's joined us on the live, and there are some people that we both know here. And thank you for showing up. Thank you for joining the conversation. And please, you know, feel free to share your comments. And walaikum salam, Zahra. Share your comments and your questions and anything that comes up. We're here. We're doing this together. When I wanted to talk about this topic, I went to different spaces that I hold space for people, and I asked about, like, what do they want to know about, and what are their sentiments around this. And a lot of the people who did speak up was really, there was a lot of discomfort on this topic. And there was like, almost like, what do you mean? It's like, what do you mean by sexual health for divorced Muslim women or divorced Muslimas? And what do you like? This almost sounds, some of the comments I got was, this almost sounds haram. And I wanted to just kind of point that out, is that we all have beliefs that we're not aware of when it comes to sex, when it comes to gender. And let's just talk about sex here in terms of our sexuality, because sex is a part of life. It's how life gets created. And there is a lot of taboo or a lot of shame in our cultures that we have all come from, and in culture and society. So I want to talk a little bit about, maybe open up the conversation. Let's start from there in terms of this topic of sex being taboo or being a lot of shame around. And yeah, Zara was saying, yes, exactly. I'm curious to know more. So, and I know that you write a lot of content around this, and I love that you do that. So let's expand a little bit about about the taboo-ness, and let's kind of, I was thinking about this. We both love to be disruptors. I know that about you and myself, right? So let's challenge some of the beliefs that we have going on right now that we're operating from. And let's disrupt the beliefs that are not coming from Quran and Sunnah, because as Muslims, we take that as truth, right? We take that as our guidance. So let's talk about that, the taboo and the shame around sex.
Yeah, so what I'm seeing is that a lot of Muslims, unfortunately, are quite narrow-minded when it comes to sex. And it's usually because of how they were raised, the culture around them, the household they grew up in. And that isn't what Islam teaches us. It doesn't teach us to be narrow-minded when it comes to sex. A lot of people focus on one main theme when it comes to sex, and the theme that they focus on is that you can only have sex when you are married. That is their focus. So if you have that as your lens, anything that doesn't fit that theme is, in their eyes, haram, or in their eyes, something that you shouldn't talk about because it may lead to haram. And for some people, being raised that way, perhaps there were good intentions behind that. Perhaps, parents taught their kids don't have sex before marriage because they wanted to protect their kids. They didn't want their kids to sin and be further away from Allah. So perhaps the intention was good, but when you are very narrow-minded, it can sometimes have damaging effects when that is your only view. And if you kind of err from that path, it can make you feel like, I'm not a good Muslim, or how can we be talking about sex for divorced women when we're only meant to engage in sex within a marriage? And actually what we're here to say is sex within a marriage is one small part of the broad spectrum of your sexuality that Allah gave you, that Allah blessed you with. I want people to really understand that you're born with your sexual health. A baby is not married. A baby is not going to engage in the act of sex, but they are still born with sexual health. And that sexual health is going to evolve as that baby grows into a child and then a teenager and an adult. And as that person goes through different phases in their lives. And so that person is going to have different needs as they evolve and as they grow. And so if a woman has previously been married and is currently divorced, that still applies because she's now in a different phase of her life. But it's not that her sexuality it's not like a switch that can be turned on or off. It's something that is innate within you, kind of like when you have, this hunger to eat something, and eating food is not the same as having a desire for sex, but that's the kind of closest analogy I can think of. It's not that like you can, like if someone is fasting, it's not like you can usually automatically switch off the hunger. Typically when we fast, we still do feel hunger. It's still there, but it's about learning how to manage it. It's knowing that, okay, here's the month of Ramadan. I'm meant to be fasting. Yeah, I still feel hunger. I can't really switch it off. Maybe I can distract myself, but it's still there. And that still applies with that desire for sex. So it is important to understand that if a woman has previously been married and is now in a state where she's divorced and she is choosing to abide by Allah's prescription for sex, and Allah's prescription is that of, yes, the act of sex is meant to occur within the context of a marriage, but it's understanding, okay, what's the purpose of sex in the first place? Why did Allah create sex? And when you break it down and when you dive into Quran, authentic Sunnah, Hadith, and you dive into seeing the example of the Prophet, we begin to understand that sex wasn't just created for procreation, although that is obviously one purpose of it. Sex was created, I believe, for three main reasons. It was created for worship, it was created for intimacy, and it was created for pleasure. So when you break it down and understand the intention and purpose of sex, worship, pleasure, and intimacy, it is possible to achieve those things without the act of sex itself. So if you are a divorced woman and you feel that you have this desire for sex, and perhaps you feel guilty, perhaps you feel ashamed, perhaps you kind of don't know what to do with yourself, and you feel like you have no one to talk to about it, but you are still being steadfast and making that decision that I'm not going to engage in sex if I'm not married, which is a great thing. May Allah help you in that endeavor. It's understanding, what am I craving? If I have this desire for sex, why do I have this desire for sex? What do I believe that sex will give me? And how can I achieve those things that I'm seeking in a way that doesn't require the act of sex? How can I worship Allah? How can I experience pleasure in my body, or like physically in my body, or mentally and emotionally experience pleasure? How can I experience intimacy? Intimacy doesn't have to be with a spouse. Intimacy doesn't have to be with the opposite sex. It can very much be with yourself. It can very much be with your Lord. It can very much be with your family and your friends. So that is what I really want people to understand, that sexual health isn't limited to the act of sex. It is so broad, like our sexuality, which is tied in with our sensuality, is something that we can continue to explore and develop and enjoy, whether we're married or not.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think a lot of things that you said were so like first time that people hear these type of things, that, you know, what is sexual health? How do you define that? You know, and thinking of sex as a desire, and something that you talked about, you related it to hunger, right? That's also a desire, a need, actually, if you will, like to, you know, the desire of like wanting to eat, and then the need of it. And desires are not bad, because that's what makes us human. I want to just kind of humanize this, that like these are innate desires that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within our fitra as human beings, right? However, we are also given the ability to either have the desires control us, or we control the desires, right? As an elevated human being, we can discipline ourselves in the type of food that we eat and what we choose to put in our body, just like we discipline the desires for sex. And I love that, you know, and doing it in a way that is pleasing to Allah, which is going to be in a marriage, right? Which is an act of worship. And I love what you said in one of your posts about sex, and you just talked about it right now, that one of the things is worship, right? But also abstaining from sex is also an act of worship, right? Because it requires you to step into this higher self of yours. It requires you to focus on what is pleasing to Allah rather than what is pleasing to your own desires. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, what automatically comes to mind, so when I was creating that, I really feel like whenever I say sex is an act of worship, automatically anyone who is single or divorced feels like, what's the word? Perhaps may feel like, oh, I can't do this act of worship. Like they're missing out, that fear of missing out. Like, I can't have sex because I'm not in a marriage, I'm single, or I'm divorced. And so I say that, yes, sex is an act of worship in the context of marriage when you're having sex with your spouse. But equally, if you're not in a marriage, abstaining or choosing to abstain because you want to please your Lord, choosing to abstain from sex is also an act of worship. And some would say it's a harder act of worship. And if it is harder for you, you're going to be rewarded, for that, in that, to that level, to that degree that you struggle with that act of worship, you will be rewarded more. Just like I'm sure you've heard of I'm assuming it's a hadith. What I'm going to say hopefully is relevant to you, is where, if someone is really struggling to read the Quran, but they go ahead and they read it, even if they mispronounce certain words, but they still strive and they work hard to reading the Quran and reciting, they will be rewarded more than someone who can recite beautifully and fluently with no mistakes, because it is, Allah can see that you're struggling with that act of worship. So that definitely applies if you're divorced, if you're single, and you're struggling with abstaining from sex. The other thing that comes to mind, which is one of my posts I put like probably a few months ago with regards to Surah Yusuf. And in that surah, Allah describes Prophet Yusuf as, you know, being tempted, like, you know, the woman of the house trying to seduce him. He was single, he was not married, and he chose to abstain from sex, which was, you know, you can put yourself in that position. It's a difficult thing to do. When we are presented with temptation, any kind of temptation, it's difficult to turn that temptation down. But he, in the surah, if you go and read that surah, you will see that Prophet Yusuf in that moment pleaded to Allah and made a dua to Allah. Prophet Yusuf understood that Allah gave me my desire for sex and gave me this sexuality. It wasn't that Prophet Yusuf had no desire. Prophet Yusuf actually did have desire. The ayah says something along the lines of, Ya Allah, if you do not help me, I will succumb to this. Meaning, I will give in to my desire and I will perhaps commit extramarital sex with this woman. But in that moment, Prophet Yusuf, and this is a prophet, and obviously we know that prophets, compared to us regular humans, prophets have a much deeper connection with Allah. He was a prophet and he knew that he would struggle with his desire. So, and he didn't rely on himself. He turned it over to Allah and said, Ya Allah, help me in this situation and have mercy on me. Otherwise I will succumb. We need to be doing that ourselves. If you're a divorced woman and you're really feeling like there's a lot of temptation around you, you're feeling like I have a lot of sexual energy and a lot of desire and I feel like close to sinning, but I don't want to. Allah doesn't expect you to manage that challenge on your own. Turn to him, hand it over to him. Another thing that you were talking about with regards to sexual health is that sexual health isn't just limited to the act of sex. It's really very broad. When you think about women on the whole, we go through a menstrual cycle. And within that menstrual cycle, there are 4 different phases. And for women, it will experience different levels of desire depending on which of those 4 phases they happen to be in at that moment. So, you know, if you are, and I recommend this, if you are keeping track of where you are in your cycle, there are apps that can help you to do this. Typically, most women will have a higher desire for sex when they are in their ovulatory phase, which is roughly a 5-day window within that 28-day cycle. So when you are aware of that and you can plan for that, you can think, oh, this is when I'm usually going to be ovulating. This is when, and you may not notice it until you start tracking. If this is when I usually will start to have that really high desire for sex and really struggle with my desire, how can I plan for that? How can I be preventative and proactive to manage that, knowing that that inevitably will arise within your cycle? So what's kind of recommended is when you are approaching your ovulatory phase, plan to fast if you're able to. You don't have to, but plan for it. Or plan to do things that give you pleasure. Plan to do things that increase in your worship. Plan to do things that increase in your level of intimacy, because that's really what we're seeking. When we have a desire for sex, we are seeking intimacy, we are seeking pleasure, we're seeking connection with someone. You can enjoy intimacy, connection and pleasure with other people, friends and families, or with yourself. Really engage in self-care and do things that are thrilling for you. A lot of people enjoy sex because of the thrilling nature of it. It's exciting, it's the novelty, the fantasy of it. You can still enjoy all of those things in a halal way. Plan for it. And it might not be just during ovulation. It could be any time during the month. If you happen to notice this spontaneous desire, it's, you know, first of all, having compassion for yourself, like you said, humanizing it. There is nothing, you don't need to feel guilty about it. Allah doesn't judge you for your feeling. Allah doesn't judge you for the desire that you have. Allah judges us on our intention and judges us on the actions we then take based on the feeling. So just as if someone is experiencing anger and they're experiencing rage and anger, they have a choice of how to act. They can, you know, be really violent, or they can, you know, sit down and take a deep breath and do something that makes them feel calm. You know, both of those emotions are still there. Allah doesn't judge you on the emotion. It's not haram to feel angry or rage. It's a natural human emotion. The same applies to sexual desire. Allah is not going to, you know, Allah is not going to punish you for that desire that He actually gave you. He gave you that desire. He's not going to punish you for it. He wants to know whether you prefer humans or him.
Yeah.
Who are you going to prioritize in that moment? And inshallah, you choose Allah, you prioritize him, and you prioritize yourself, because at the end of the day, as we know, every choice we make, every action we make, we are held accountable for it. So it's obviously very easy to give into temptations, but sometimes we need to choose the harder route, because we'll be rewarded for it. And it doesn't always have to be hard, because you can give that hard thing to Allah and say, Ya Allah, I'm really struggling with this. Have mercy on me. Take this from me. Help me manage this. And watch, Allah will answer your dua.
I love it. I love it. Every single word that you just said, I was just soaking it all up. And I'm sure everyone here on this live is really soaking it all up also. And one of the things that you said about, like, Allah is looking to see whether you're going to give in to people, follow people, or Allah. And even the self, right? Are you going to give into your desires, right? Are you going to put Allah even before your own self? And it's such a, I feel like these type of tests bring you so close to Allah, and strengthen your bond, and strengthen your tawakkul, and strengthen your taqwa, to be able to navigate and operate life through that level of consciousness. There was a question here that I'm going to get to in a second, but what I wanted to actually, let me ask the question and then we'll get back to this question. Working with people who are women who are Muslim women, I mean, they keep saying Muslim women because this is, we want to align ourselves with what the Quran and the Sunnah says, right? And our tradition. And so working with Muslim women who are going through divorce, or who are now finding themselves single, there is this healing process and this learning to get to know the self journey that I take women on. Because usually when you in a breakup and you get out of a relationship, there's a loss of a sense of self. You don't know who you are. You don't know how you got here. And with the breakup, you can feel like you're broken. And so this journey of learning to know who you are, understanding yourself, rediscovering yourself, and then reinventing yourself. Part of this process is a lot about connection, reconnecting the self back to the self, and reconnecting back to Allah. Right? And they go hand in hand, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with Allah. And one of the things that you mentioned is about intimacy, and in order to have intimacy, you need connection. Because if you're not connected to yourself, you won't be able to offer or receive intimacy, right? And so part of this is helping women to connect back to themselves, connect back to their fitra, connect back to their soul, and understanding what excites them, what gives them pleasure, learning to love yourself, to accept yourself, to honor yourself. And that includes part of your femininity and your sexuality. And I think this relates going into how we think about ourself. And I'm going to differentiate it by saying the soul versus the self, because the self is also the self is also translated as the nafs, or the ego, right? Whereas the soul is very different than the ego, right? They're different in terms of the soul is the nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, meaning our fitra soul, right? And embracing all parts of it, all parts of our sensuality, our femininity, our sexuality, embracing it as part of honoring how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us, and connecting that soul or that spiritual care with the body, and that sexual care, sexual health. And as you explained, sexual health is not just about the body, and about what the changes that happen in the body, and the way that the hormones affect the feelings that come up in the body. But before that, there's even an emotional component, and there's a spiritual component as well. So fusing those two together on the journey of getting to know yourself and reinventing yourself, I'm going to connect it with with the question that we had here. It says, can you share some examples of how you can fulfill your needs for intimacy and pleasure? And I'm going to add, and with connection to yourself, Allah, and then the outside world.
So there are so many different things that we need to do, and I'm glad that you said that some of the work you do with the women you work with is helping them rediscover themselves. I think that's really important. Whether you're divorced, married, single, we're constantly on this journey of getting to know ourselves, getting to know our true selves, getting to know the nature of our soul, as you said. And so if you find yourself in this position where you're used to experiencing intimacy and pleasure with another man when you were married, and now you're in this position where you can no longer rely on someone else for that intimacy, pleasure, and connection, it's really going back and thinking about, how did I feel intimate when I was growing up as a child? Did I have any of those opportunities? What were things that gave me joy when I was growing up before having to rely on someone else in a marriage? What is it that gives you joy and pleasure in your day-to-day lives? Are you doing enough of those things? And it's very individual. I could go, I could spend hours just giving you a list, but that's pointless when some of it may not apply to you. Some of it may be the opposite of pleasure for you. So it's really tuning in with yourself, tuning in with your inner child, going back to your childhood. And if you do have examples from your childhood, is bringing them back into your adult life now and thinking, let me try these things now. Do they continue to give me joy? And being willing to do that trial and error process until you find what lights you up. I think a lot of us are looking for excitement and looking for thrill, and there are so many avenues where we can have thrilling lives, adventurous lives, fun lives, because I think what a lot of women are craving is they are craving a fantasy, they're craving adventure, thrill, and excitement, and there's nothing wrong with those things. You can have a really amazing life without a husband and without releasing your desire for sex. And sexual desire, when you break it down, it's an energy that is within your body. It's a sexual energy, and energy needs to move. If it kind of is stagnant, that is where you can feel blocked, and that is where you can feel like you're kind of stuck and you don't know how to move forward with that energy, where you kind of like try and shut down your desire, which I think probably quite a lot of divorced women are doing. Is if they're deciding that I'm not going to have sex because I'm not married, but I still have this desire and I have no clue what to do with it, so let me just try and distract myself, shut it down. That desire hasn't gone away. It needed to transmute, it needed to transform into something else. The nature of sexual desire and sexual energy is a very creative force and creative energy. So if you are noticing yourself having this desire for sex, ask yourself, what is it that I'm meant to create in this moment within my life? It doesn't have to be anything major. It could be something so small, but something that is creative, that also gives you intimacy, pleasure, connection, enhances your spirituality even. So that is what I want women to understand, is just because you're feeling sexual desire, it doesn't mean it needs to be released through the act of sex. That sexual desire can be released through so many other different forms. And really the underlying foundation of that is a creative force, as I said, a creative energy that you can put something out into the world that is thrilling and exciting and gives you pleasure and intimacy from that desire for sex. So you don't have to shut it down. And if anything, I don't recommend shutting it down. I recommend feeling it. Like, don't be afraid to feel that sexual desire. Like I said, you're not going to be punished for feeling it. Allowing yourself to feel it and then ask yourself, what do I want to do with this energy, is going to be much more positive and beneficial for you. Because I think if divorced women are shutting their desire down all the time, it's just going to build up, and then you're going to kind of feel like you need to explode all of that energy. Whereas if you be present with that desire and think, hey, why am I feeling this way? What is it that I'm truly craving? What am I truly seeking? How can I experience those things I'm craving and seeking in a way that is good for me, beneficial for me, sustainable, doesn't damage my body, in a way that is halal, that is pleasing to my Lord? That is, inshallah, the path to take.
I love that, all of that. And as I was listening to you, and you talking about, you know, connecting back to your inner child and connecting back to what are the things that brought you joy, that brought you excitement. Because a lot of women, after they go through a breakup and out of their marriage, they don't know, they've lost that part of themselves, and they have to, and now the journey begins of reconnecting back to that part of themselves. And for a lot of us, it's like, feels like it was so long ago. And what I was thinking, came to me was like, you know how this childlike joy that can be so infectious, and it's almost like ecstasy when we see children, they're just have nothing else on the mind, and they're so in tune with experiencing pleasure, experiencing joy. They allow themselves to have that. And we can get back there.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because children in those moments where they're experiencing that sheer joy, that childlike joy that you're describing, they in those moments are fulfilling their purpose in that moment in time. Allah created children for so many different reasons, obviously, but in that specific moment in time where they're experiencing a lot of joy, they are fulfilling the purpose that Allah wants from them. Allah wants them to experience that pleasure and joy in their childhood. And so we need to ask ourselves, when we're now an adult, we're grown up, and we're having this desire perhaps, how do we experience that type of, how do we also fulfill our purpose in this moment in time? So the child, when they were a child, was fulfilling his or her purpose. Perhaps one of the reasons you have all of this desire is because it's a signal to you that in this very moment in time, there's part of your purpose that you're not fulfilling. So as I was saying, that sexual energy is quite a creative energy. What is it that you're meant to be creating and doing and being in this moment in time that is part of your potential and purpose? What part of you have you shut down? Perhaps within the marriage, you shut down a part of you, and you've now got this desire that you're labeling as sexual desire, but actually maybe it's not sexual desire. Maybe it's just a signal that there's a part of you that you're not fulfilling, a purpose that Allah put within you that you're ignoring. And it could really be the start of something beautiful. Maybe it's an initiative that you're going to start, or a project. Because if you think about it, I've noticed that when I'm so in the middle of doing something like a project, and I'm so focused on that, I don't really have time to think about my sexual desire. And I'm currently married, and so, you know, I have rights and there are rights and responsibilities sexually in my marriage. But if I'm feeling really excited by this new project that I'm doing in my business or in my personal life, I'm not really distracted by desire for sex, because my desire has been put into this project. So what project can you start or continue or bring back and revive that lights you up? Put your energy into that, and just you'll notice that perhaps the desire for sex goes away, but the desire to put yourself first and enjoy your life comes back. And I noticed in myself, when I started believing that I am worthy of feeling good, and I started doing those things that I perhaps thought weren't very important, like brushing my hair, I kind of just sometimes would just forget about doing that, or, you know, putting on a bit of makeup, or wearing something nice rather than just wearing the same old thing. Just doing those tiny little things made such a big difference. And I'm married, and so I think it's more relevant if you're not in a marriage to do those things, because I think most Muslim women perhaps are only doing those things like wearing makeup, dressing nicely, brushing their hair when they are married. But actually do those things, make yourself feel good, make yourself look good, make yourself feel good, even when you're different. Oh, sugar.
Oh, you're good. I think you just got paused for a second. Isn't she amazing, everyone? Like just the knowledge and the wisdom and the gems that Amira has been dropping on us have just been mind blowing. And I'm so happy that you're here with us, Amira, and I'm so happy that you guys have joined as well. And I love what you just mentioned. Okay, well, she'll come back. I love what she just mentioned about doing things for yourself, and especially as women, we're designed as nurturers, and we're so trained to give and to give of ourselves, and that we end up neglecting ourselves, especially if we haven't been taught. how to care and value for yourself in a way that is going to allow you to show up and serve the way you are in all your relationships and all the different areas of your life. Let me see if she's in here. Okay. Yeah, definitely not what everyone expected to hear. Yes. And that's what we talked about in the beginning about let's start uprooting and challenging beliefs that we've been carrying around for so long that are not coming from Quran and Sunnah and that are not serving us or helping us. And one of the things that I wanted to really just tie together here is that when you're going through a breakup and you're learning how to find yourself, know yourself, accept yourself, love yourself, it's really embracing the woman that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you as, right? Choosing your gender for you and creating, you know, this, especially as a female, we have such an honored place in terms of our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We share the same word, a word of rahmah, and the womb. They mean the same, you know, they're the same word. And we share those, that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that other people don't, right? And in terms of having the ability, whether you have children or not, having the ability to host life, right? To birth life. All of this is part of our femininity and our sensuality, and honoring that and not suppressing those things, those innate things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created within you. I thought this was fabulous information. And so inspiring. Arabian is saying, living in the moment, stop romanticizing what you could be doing if you were married. The truth is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only knows. You could be married dealing with the same frustration. Exactly, I love that. We are where Allah wants us to be every moment for a reason. Absolutely. Yeah, here we go. Amira's going to come back and join us. So these were some great gems that you're sharing with us, and so in line with what you were saying, Amira. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back.
I'm so sorry. For some reason, it went off. It wasn't charging. I thought it was, and it wasn't. So my battery just died, and I had to move somewhere. It's like literally at 0%, but it's charging. Hopefully, it stays. Inshallah, it doesn't cut off again. Sorry about that.
No problems, no worries. No, we were just discussing how you tied everything so beautifully together in terms of embracing your femininity, your sensuality, your sexuality, in terms of knowing yourself, knowing your Lord, and living on purpose in the life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you to live out. And I think maybe your charge is not holding on, but that's okay, because you gave us so much to reflect on. You gave us so much to think about, and recognize that the journey is in here. The journey of ourself with ourself and our relationship with Allah, and then how we extend ourself outward into all the different areas of our life. And number one, first and foremost, is honoring the self. Because when you honor the self, you honor the Creator, and you also then can nurture and give to everyone else in terms of how you honor them. So Jazakallah khair, everyone, for joining and for participating. And let me know if you have any questions, and if Amira comes back, you know, we can address that. Or what we can do is, you know, she can address it later on in the comments. And let me know if this was helpful. And if you're watching this now or later on recorded, share your takeaway here. I think it would be wonderful for all of us to learn what we got out of the situation in this live, in this experience. Jazakallah khair for joining. Assalamu alaikum.